Richard Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 47th floor, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a kingdom he'd conquered. At 50, too, he commanded a tech empire worth billions, his name synonymous with innovation and ruthless business acumen. But success had come at a price he was only beginning to understand. His phone buzzed with another congratulatory message about the latest merger, but all he could think about was the call he'd received 3 hours ago from his 24-year-old daughter Emma. 7 words that had shattered his world. "Dad, I don't want to be rich anymore." If this story resonates with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and don't forget to comment below with your thoughts. Subscribe to Trillionaire in Love for more life-changing stories that will touch your heart and transform your perspective. Emma Blackwood had grown up in a world where money solved everything except the problems that mattered most. Private schools, designer clothes, exotic vacations, and a trust fund that would set her up for multiple lifetimes, yet she felt emptier with each passing year. While her father built his empire, she'd been raised by nannies, tutors, and boarding school administrators. Love had been measured in dollars spent rather than moments shared. The conversation that morning had started like any other. Richard had called during his brief coffee break, squeezing in a perfunctory check-in between board meetings. "How's the apartment?" he'd asked, referring to the penthouse he'd bought her in Manhattan's most exclusive district. "Did the decorator finish the renovations?" Emma had sat in that sterile, magazine-perfect space, surrounded by furniture that cost more than most people's annual salaries, and felt something break inside her. "Dad, I'm giving it all away." "Giving what away?" Richard had laughed, assuming she meant donating some clothes or furniture. "Everything. The apartment, the trust fund, the cars, the jewelry, all of it." Her voice was calm, steady, resolved. "I don't want to be rich anymore." The silence stretched between them across the phone line, filled with 24 years of missed connections, hurried conversations, and love expressed through bank transfers instead of presents. Now, 3 hours later, Richard couldn't focus on the acquisition reports spread across his mahogany desk. His assistant had rescheduled 2 meetings because he couldn't stop replaying Emma's words. He'd built everything for her, hadn't he? The company, the wealth, the security, all so she'd never want for anything. Richard's journey to wealth hadn't been easy. Born into a middle-class family in Ohio, he'd watched his parents struggle to pay bills, seen his mother cry over medical expenses they couldn't afford, witnessed his father work 3 jobs just to keep their modest home. He'd sworn he'd never let his future family face that uncertainty. Every 16-hour workday, every missed dinner, every skipped vacation had been justified by that promise. But somewhere in his relentless pursuit of financial security, he'd lost sight of what he was actually securing it for. Emma's rebellion hadn't started overnight. For years, she'd tried to connect with her father through his language business. She'd earned an MBA from Wharton, interned at competing firms, and even pitched innovative ideas for Blackwood Industries. But Richard had always been too busy, too focused on the next deal, the next milestone. Their conversations invariably centered around her allowance, her expenses, or her future inheritance. The turning point had come 6 months earlier, when Emma volunteered at a homeless shelter in Brooklyn. She'd initially gone as part of a charity board obligation, another way to spend her father's money meaningfully. But working alongside people who had nothing yet gave everything to help others, showed her a richness she'd never experienced in her privileged bubble. Maria, a single mother who'd lost her home due to medical bills, had become Emma's unlikely mentor. Despite having nothing, Maria radiated a joy and purpose that Emma had never felt. When Emma mentioned her father's wealth, Maria had said something that haunted her. "Money is a tool, Mija, not a master. But some people spend so much time building the tool, they forget what they wanted to build." Richard finally left his office that evening and drove to Emma's penthouse. He'd expected to find her packing designer bags, maybe going through some rebellious phase. Instead, he found her sitting on the floor with stacks of documents, legal papers, transferring ownership of her assets to various charities. "Emma, what are you doing?" He stood in the doorway of what had been her bedroom, now empty except for a single suitcase and a sleeping bag. She looked up at him with eyes that reminded him painfully of her mother, the woman he'd loved and lost to cancer 5 years ago, another battle that money couldn't win. "I'm trying to find myself, Dad, and I can't do that when everything around me is a reminder of what I haven't earned." "You don't need to earn it. I earned it for you." Emma stood, and Richard was struck by how much she looked like Sarah in that moment, not just physically, but in the quiet strength of her conviction. "But what did I earn for you?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Richard had spent decades accumulating wealth, but when had Emma ever felt needed, valued for who she was rather than what she represented? "You're my daughter. You don't need to earn my love. Then why does it feel conditional?" Emma's voice cracked slightly. "Every conversation we have is about money. Every gift you give costs more than the last. When was the last time you asked me what I was thinking about, what I was afraid of, what made me happy without it relating to your checkbook?" Richard felt the truth of her words like physical blows. He remembered scheduling Emma's childhood around board meetings, missing her school plays for investor dinners, sending assistants to parent-teacher conferences because he was in Tokyo or London or anywhere but present in his daughter's life. The challenges they faced in the following weeks tested both of them in ways neither expected. Emma moved into a small studio apartment in Queens, took a job at the nonprofit where she'd been volunteering, and began living on her modest salary. She experienced anxiety she'd never known, worrying about rent, budgeting for groceries, taking the subway instead of private cars. But she also discovered a sense of accomplishment she'd never felt when success was handed to her. When she helped secure funding for the shelter's expansion, the victory felt entirely her own. Richard, meanwhile, faced his own reckoning. For the first time in decades, he had to examine what his wealth had actually cost him. He'd gained the world, but lost connection with the one person who mattered most. His empire felt hollow without someone to share it with meaningfully. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday evening 2 months after Emma's declaration. Richard showed up at her small apartment, not in his usual chauffeur-driven Mercedes, but having taken the subway himself, a mode of transportation he hadn't used since college. Emma opened the door to find her father soaked from the rain, holding 2 cups of coffee from a bode down the street. "I don't know how to do this," he said simply. "I don't know how to be your father without being your ATM." For the first time in years, Emma hugged him, really hugged him, not the brief, obligatory embraces at charity galas or holiday gatherings. They sat on her small couch, and Richard listened, truly listened, as Emma talked about her work, her fears, her dreams that had nothing to do with his money. She told him about the families she was helping, the policy changes she was advocating for, the sense of purpose that filled her days. "I'm proud of you," he said finally, and meant it in a way that had nothing to do with her bank account or her last name. "I need you to know," Emma said carefully, "I'm not rejecting you by rejecting the wealth. I'm trying to find a relationship with you that isn't built on transactions." Richard nodded slowly. "Your mother used to say, I confused providing with loving. I thought giving you everything meant I was being a good father. You are a good father, Dad. You just forgot that the best things you could give me weren't things at all." Over the following months, Richard began restructuring his life as deliberately as he'd once restructured companies. He stepped back from day-to-day operations, promoting capable executives to handle what he'd once insisted only he could manage. He started volunteering at Emma's shelter, using his business expertise to help them optimize their operations and funding strategies. Most importantly, he began showing up not as Richard Blackwood, CEO, but as Emma's father. He attended her presentations to city council members about housing policy. He helped serve meals at the shelter on weekends. He listened to her dreams of becoming a social worker and starting her own nonprofit. and for the first time, his pride in her had nothing to do with what his money could accomplish. Emma gradually accepted some financial help, but on her terms a small loan to start her nonprofit, which she insisted on paying back with interest. She kept her modest apartment, her practical car, her carefully budgeted life. But she also rebuilt her relationship with her father on a foundation of mutual respect rather than financial dependence. The moment that sealed their transformation came during Thanksgiving dinner at the shelter, where they'd both volunteered to serve meals to homeless families. Richard watched Emma comfort a little girl who missed her grandmother, saw how naturally his daughter connected with people who had every reason to be bitter about their circumstances, yet chose hope instead. "She's remarkable," Maria told Richard as they cleaned dishes together afterward, "and not because of where she came from, but because of who she chose to become." Richard realized that Emma had taught him the difference between being wealthy and being rich. Wealth was about accumulation, richness was about contribution. He'd spent decades building wealth, but Emma had shown him how to build a rich life. As father and daughter walked home together through the city streets, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death: complete contentment with the present moment. No deals to close, no calls to return, no empire to expand. Just time with his daughter, talking about her work, her hopes, her plans to change small corners of the world. "Dad," Emma said as they reached her building, "I want you to know I've never been prouder to be your daughter than I am right now." Richard looked at this remarkable young woman who'd had the courage to walk away from everything he'd built for her in order to build something more meaningful with him. "And I've never been prouder to be your father." The phrase that had left him speechless, "I don't want to be rich anymore," had initially sounded like rejection, but Richard now understood it as an invitation. Emma hadn't been rejecting wealth. She'd been rejecting the walls it had built between them. She'd chosen connection over comfort, relationship over riches, love over luxury. In teaching her father that the most valuable things in life couldn't be purchased, Emma had given him the greatest gift of all: the chance to be not just a successful businessman, but a present, loving father. Their story reminds us that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the quality of our relationships, the depth of our connections, and the positive impact we have on the world around us. Sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is walk away from what everyone else wants in order to find what we actually need. Money will always be a tool, but love, real, present, unconditional love, is the treasure that enriches our lives in ways no fortune ever could. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs this reminder about what truly matters in life. Leave a comment below telling us about a time when you chose connection over convenience or love over luxury. And don't forget to subscribe to Trillionaire in Love for more inspiring stories that will challenge your perspective and warm your heart. Remember, the richest life is one filled not with possessions, but with purpose, presence, and authentic human connection.